भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्. शांति शांति शांति. Namaskar my dear friends. This is video number 10 on Panchadasi of Vidyarnaya-Bharti. This is chapter number 7, part 5. Brahma knowledge, provision by intellect. The witness, though self-luminous, is in common with the other things provided by a mode of the intellect alone. Nor is this tantamount to the relinquishment of the final doctrine of the self-luminosity of Brahma. The authors of the sacred teaching have excluded only the provision by the fruit, namely the reflection of intelligence in the mental mode. Not the reflection, but the mental mode is capable of apprehending the self. The non-self is apprehended both by the mode and by the fruit. The reflection of intelligence, which is present in the mode by the mode of the intellect. Ignorance is destroyed by the reflection of intelligence. The pot is presented. But in the case of Brahma, though for the sake of the removal of ignorance, the provision of the mode is required, there is no necessity for the reflection, since Brahma shines by its own light. It is a light that was never on sea or land. It lends its luster even to the luminaries of the firmament. The reflection of intelligence is important to illumine its prototype. For the perception of pot, etc., both the light of the eye and the lamp light are required. But for the perception of lamp, none except the eye is needed. As in the mode that apprehends the pot, etc., even in the mode which is of the form of Brahma, there is present the reflection of intelligence. But in the former case, the reflection, which is not identical with the pot, manifests the pot, while in the latter instance, the reflection does not appear to be different from Brahma. Like the lamp light in the presence of the noonday sun, before the mighty effulgence of Brahma, the borrowed light of the reflection fades into nothingness. Need it then be said that it is powerless to produce in Brahma the excellence called manifestation? The text, knowing that to be distinctionless, infinite, devoid of probands and example, not the object of the instruments of the knowledge, and beginningless, the enlightened are released, declares of Brahma that it is not pervaded by the fruit. The word aprameya indicates that Brahma is not apprehended by the reflection. The text, by the mind alone is this to be attained. There is no plurality whatsoever. Clearly states that Brahma is pervaded by the mode of the intellect. Need for repeated inquiry. Part 6 of chapter 7. Need for repeated inquiry. It was said that the Vidyarnaya text, which is being commented on in the present chapter, attributes to the Jiva the states of immediate experience and removal of the misery. The words "if he knows the self as this am I" indicate the direct experience of the nature of Brahma. Though immediate experience is the legitimate result of the study of the scriptural text, hearing or studying them once is not enough. The Sutrakara says, chapter 4, part 1, that repetition of the mental functions of knowing, meditating, etc. is required on account of the text giving instruction more than once. Repetition is needed in order to deepen the knowledge once gained. Sankara says hearing, etc., along with calmness, etc., are to be practiced in such a way that the on the sense of knowledge of the sense of sentence I am Brahma becomes firm. For various reasons, the knowledge from the scriptural text once heard or studied is prone to be weak. First, there is a variety and multiplicity of scriptural text which may give rise to doubts. Secondly, since the sense of major text, which is of the form of impartite non-dual Brahma, is non-empirical, there may arise a sense of its impossibility. Lastly, the conception of the contrary in the form of conceit like agency, etc., tends to weaken the knowledge of the truth once gained. As these three factors work in concert to make Brahma knowledge appear slender and superficial, to match their strength, scripture must be studied over and over again. Repeated hearing serves to dispel all doubts as to the intentions of scripture. In the section dealing with works, due to differences among subsections and differences among desires, various works are enjoined. From this, it may be inferred that even in the section about knowledge, conflicting statements are to be found. To remove such a possible doubt, repeated study is necessary. Hearing or study is the cognition that for the entire Vedantas, the sole purport is Brahma. In the Samnayadhyaya of the Brahma Sutra, nature of hearing is clearly explained. Manana or reflection is the process of making the meaning of the Vedantas intelligible by finding out adequate arguments. Reflection removes the contingents of the impossibility of the sense of Vedanta and presents it as a perfect possibility. This is declared in the second chapter of the Brahma Sutra. Due to long practice, ranging over a period of innumerable births, there arises every moment the cognition that the body is the self. Similarly, also, the notion that the world is real. Such conceptions of the contrary vanish when there is one pointed meditation. This is, this is achieved even prior to the instruction about the truth through meditation. That one pointedness of the mind is the result of meditation is patent from the fact that the enquiry into meditation on the qualified Brahma is found in the sacred teaching of the Vedanta. If a person has not practiced meditation prior to the instruction about Brahma, in his case the notions of the contrary are removed by the practice of Brahma, that is, by pondering over the truth of the identity between Brahma and the Self. The wise call that to be the practice of Brahma, which consists of thinking about Brahma, bearing about Brahma, and speaking about Brahma. The Shruti enjoins that a Brahmana who is a hero in the realm of the spirit should know Brahma and gain steadiness in that knowledge, and that he should not fritter away his energy in directing his thoughts to other things. His whole attention must center round the self. Lord Krishna strikes the same note when he says in the Gita, those people who think of me and meditate on me without interruption, to them who are steadfast, I convey what they lack and preserve what they already have. Both scripture and the traditional code enjoin the constant one-pointedness of the intellect in the self, so that the conceptions of the contrary may cease. Those are conceptions of the contrary which, obscuring the real nature of things, project the cognition of their contraries. When a youth regards his parent as his foe, he is harboring in his bosom the conception of what is contrary to truth. The ultimate truth is that the self is not the body and that the world is an appearance. The conception of the contrary of this truth is that the body is the self and that the world is absolutely real. Since this conception is destroyed only by the conception of the truth, the distinction of the self from the body and the illusoriness of the world must be constantly meditated upon. It may be asked whether there is not any rule to be observed in conceiving the nature of the self as distinct from the body and contemplating the illusoriness of the world as there is in chanting of spells or meditation on the visible image. The reply is that there is no rule whatever in regard to contemplating the real, for this contemplation has a visible fruit. Chanting of spells and meditation on an image have for their fruit some unseen results. Hence, they are governed by rules and regulations. But Brahma knowledge is not a hypothetical fruit like the attainment of heaven. It is like the activity of eating, conditioned by no hard and fast rule. A man who is hungry does not care for conventions. He is not bound by rules as the man who chants the spell is. The only aim of his endeavor is to appease his appetite. He may eat or not eat, or he may indulge himself in some other activity. But all the same, his only object in view is to satisfy his hunger. Chanting of spells is not like the activity of eating. Chanting is governed by rules which, if not observed, lead to obstacles. If the chanting be done in a way quite contrary to the rule, great harm is wrought. Instead of beneficial effects, baneful results are reaped. The conceptions of the contrary, on the other hand, are like hunger, the cause of visible misery. To vanquish this misery, any means can be employed without any regard as to rules and regulations. The means to vanquishment of misery was pointed out already. It is the thinking, hearing, and talking of Brahma. Even in the case of steady concentration on Brahma, there is not the compulsion that the mind is to be quelled, as there is in the case of meditation on visible images, etc. Meditation is defined as the uninterrupted flow of the mind which has for its sphere the visible image. Here, the strict rule is that there should not be vacillation in the mind. Patanjali defines yoga as the process of controlling the modifications of the mind. Mind control is of prime importance in meditation. Meditation is the technique of mind control. The mind is noted for its feverish activity and propensity for wandering. The shafts of the mind are swifter than even the cyclonic wind and the speed of the light waves. The mind is often compared to a maddened monkey drunk deep of the intoxicant of desire and roaming in the wilds of sense objects. Arjuna reflects this idea when he says to Krishna in the Gita, verily, the mind, O Krishna, is restless, turbulent, strong, and unyielding. Its control, like that of the wind, I consider to be very hard to achieve. Difficult though it be, it is nevertheless possible to curb the current of the mind. The flow of the mental stream can be arrested by constant effort and continued endeavor. Vasishtha in the Vasishtha says to Rama that the control of the mind is more difficult to achieve than emptying the ocean, unearthing of the mighty Sumeru, or extinguishing a raging conflict conflagration. The achievement of this difficult feat, namely the control of the mind, is the raison d'etre of meditation. In the contemplation of Brahma, however, there is nothing to be compelled, no force whatever. Not only is there no restriction with regard to thinking, talking, etc. of Brahma, a raw mind is struck with wonder at the variety of ways in which the nature of Brahma has been declared in stories and scriptures. But from the path, stories do not reflect him whose mind has culminated in the cognition. The self alone is intelligence, the world is illusory. The roots of knowledge which support him are too firm to allow him to be tossed by every passing gust of desire. But strong as the roots are, the tree is uprooted by the stronger storm. The operations of agriculture, merchandise, menial service, etc., activity in the spheres of poesy and logic and such other occupations distract the mind from contemplation. For these avocations do not remind one of the truth. They tend more to obscure the real than reveal it. Activities like eating, etc., do not, however, impede the progress of the man who contemplates the self. They do not totally throw the self into the limbo of oblivion. They are not incompatible with the contemplation of the self. Even if the flow of contemplation be interrupted for a moment, subsequently it regains its former swiftness. There is nothing very harmful in the bare forgetting of the truth for a while. The acme of misery lies in the conceptions of the contrary. Though the activities like eating, etc., may be the cause of forgetting the truth for a time, They do not project the contrary notions, and as the memory of the truth follows immediately after the cessation of such activities, there is no lease of life given to the notions of the contrary to protrude themselves. But in indulgence in logic, etc., are not on a par with activities like eating, etc. For the man who practices the other arts, there is no need for remembering the truth. Since poesy, etc., are contrary to the knowledge of the truth, they subvert what is true and distract their votary from the path of true knowledge. Know that one self alone leave off all other speech. It is the band of immortality, declares a scriptural text. Do not ponder over many words. It is only the exhaustion of speech. Distracted attention would lead one nowhere. All activities must cease if Brahma knowledge is to be made unshakable. Learning of scriptures other than the Vedantas does not help the seeker after truth. On the contrary, it pulls him down, serving only as a dead weight. Food, etc., cannot be given up because without them the jiva cannot live. This is not the case with non Vedantic study. Such study lures the aspirant very easily away from Brahma knowledge. The contention that householder saints like Janka were knowers of Brahma, though engaged in the management of worldly affairs, is not relevant. They had attained perfection in Brahma knowledge. Like the rock of ages, they stood firm and fixed in the knowledge of the self, and no allurement would be powerful enough to draw them away from their post. But those who are only on the way to perfection should not expose themselves to this hazard. A growing plant requires a fencing, whereas a stately tree can rely on its own resources. Part 7 of Chapter 7, Knowers of Brahma and World Affairs. The knowers of Brahma engage themselves in the affairs of the world, knowing full well that the world is illusory. Their action is caused by their past deeds which have begun to bear fruit. Unconcerned, they do what Prarabdha goads them to do. Though in the world they are not of the world, holding their heads in solitude, they delegate their hands to society. They are not affected by the effects of their deeds. Their deeds may even appear to be wrong and questionable. They may appear to act in undesirable ways, but their actions are not intended by them, and they are in no way hindered by their occupations. Karma is imperious in its course. There is none who can oppose its current. Those who know that prarabdha can be destroyed only by enjoying its effect submit it to it without being scorched by its heat. The enlightened and the ignorant alike have to reap the consequences of their prarabdha. Both have to walk in a path strewn with thorns. But while the enlightened walk with shoes on, the ignorant have no such protection to enable them to pass unhurt. The vulgar are led astray by their whimsical moods, whereas the wise regard themselves as witnesses and not victims of their moods. Two travelers went their way on the same road, and both of them are equally fatigued. One of them knows that the destination is near, and so he quickens his pace. in the hope of reaching it soon, but the other is heavy of heart and not knowing that his place of rest is nigh, he plods on with dragging steps. The person who has well intuited the self is not troubled by the notions of the contrary. The text speaks of such a person when it says, desiring what and for whose desire should he suffer along with the body, where there is the cognition of the illusoriness of the world, there is no room for the distinction of the subject who desires and the objects of desire. When the utter bankruptcy of the world is realized, the trinkets of the world cease to bear any fascination for man. And if there be no subject to desire and no object to be desired, all misery comes to an end like the lamp unfed by oil. A man who knows the truth about the Fata Morgana is not bewildered by it. The exquisite world of fancy created by the magician does not lure those who know it to be such. Without being deceived by it, they cast a smile at its exquisiteness and unreality. Similarly, the man who understands through inquiry the adventitious and apparent character of the beauties of the world does not set any value on them. Beholding their defects, he desires to relinquish them. That the world is full of misery is patent on its very face. There is misery in gathering the objects of the world. There is misery in preserving them. When they perish, there is misery again. The world is miserable through and through. The things which we regard as the most beautiful in the world are not really beautiful. Even the most ravishing woman in the world is no more than a mass of flesh and a bundle of bones. Defects and ugliness of the things of the world, such as these, are clearly indicated in the scriptures. A man who constantly ruminates over them can never be deluded. He is not caught in the masses of Maya and there is no misery for him. If there be a discernment of the defects of the worldly objects, there cannot arise any desire to enjoy them. A person, though harassed by hunger, does not long to eat poisoned food. If even the person who is extremely hungry should shun poison, how could a man who is satiated with sweet dishes ever think of taking it? He who has drunk deep of the nectar of Brahma knowledge, how can he long for a sip of hemlock from the fatal cup of the world? If at any time the Jnani should desire for sense enjoyments owing to the presence of prarabdha, he would not enjoy them with any satisfaction or ardor. He would approach them with supreme discontent, and his relish is comparable to that derived from having to eat the faces. A householder saint who has faith in the teaching of scripture and in the words of the preceptor, though experiencing the objects of the world, does not attach himself to them. He feels sorry that his karma has not yet come to an end and goes about his business without any liking for it. The discomfort which the Jnani feels is not a burning born of samsara, On the contrary, it is the expression of his non-attachment, of his aversion for the objects of the world. The sansarika heat is the product of illusory cognition. Ignorance is the source of the misery of transmigration. The jnani who has transcended nescience is not affected by the ruffle of the empirical life. If he be discomfited at any time, it is due to his dislike for the objects of sense. That he is not in tune with the enjoyment of the world is patent from the fact that he gets disgusted with it very soon. Desires do not multiply in his case. Desires is like a burnt seed impotent to produce the sprout. In the case of the ignorant, desires do not die with enjoyment. Fulfilled desires bring in fresh ones. Like fire fed by fuel, they grow more to more. By enjoyment which is combined with discernment does not breed fresh desire. The sun of knowledge scorches the seed of desire, making it ineffectual to sprout forth and yield fresh fruits. A thief does not deceive a friend who knows him to be a thief. The jnani knows the treachery of desires and he is not victimized by them. He becomes the master of desires and does not their slave. His mind, which is controlled by contemplation, does not run after the objects of sense. A modicum of sense enjoyment seems mountain-like to him. A prince who is freed from captivity is satisfied with a village given to him. But a king who is not pestered by foes cast his greedy eyes on neighboring principalities. The jnani is a man who is free from prison house of the world. Even an insignificant portion of worldly enjoyment suffices to satiate him. Part 8 of chapter 7. Prarabdha, the three kinds. Prarabdha, three kinds. Now, if the enlightened see only defects in the objects of the world, how could prarabdha evoke in them desire for enjoyment? The reply to this will be clear when we realize that prarabdha is of three kinds. Number one, that which generates desire. Number two, that which yields enjoyments even though not desired. And number three, that which originates enjoyment due to the desire of another. The pilferer, the the glutton, and the adulterer know that their respective acts would only lead to disaster, but driven by the force of the prarabdha which generates desire, they indulge in activities which undermine them. Such deeds cannot be prevented even by the Lord, for the Lord Himself has declared in the Gita, even a man with knowledge acts in accordance with his nature. The creature pursue nature. What can restraint do? All men act according to the impressions of their past deeds, both good and bad. Even the Lord does not prevent the course of Prakriti. The prarabdha will end only when its force is spent. If there be any other way by which it can be discarded, then personalities like Nala, Rama, and Yudhishthira would not have subjected themselves to hazards and hardships. Nor is non-intervention on the part of the Lord incompatible with His omnipotence. For even the determinate nature of prarabdha is a necessary element in the scheme of the Lord. That there is a kind of prarabdha which is preceded by non-desire is evident from the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. Arjuna asks Krishna, prompted by what does the Purusha walk in sin even without desire, O Varsneya, as if impelled by force? To this, Krishna replies, it is desire, it is anger, born of the constituent of rajas, of great appetite and very sinful. Know this here to be the foe. It is the drive of the desire which goads a man to action even without his will. It drags him to sinful ways and degrades his moral sense, natural tendencies, and propensities compel man to conform to them even against his wishes. Krishna declares in the Gita, bound, O son of Kunti, by your own deeds, born of your own nature, you shall helplessly do out of delusion what you now desire not to do. The nature of prarabdha, which yields consequences due to the desire of another, is as follow. When a particular act is neither desired nor undesired by the agent, it so happens sometimes that the agent is obliged to do that act in deference to the wishes of another person. This is a case of the prarabdha which is preceded by the desire of another. The deeds of the enlightened one fall under this category. He knows the defectiveness of the world and yet he is obliged to act. Part 9 of Chapter 7, Brahma, Knowledge and Prarabdha. If desire due to prarabdha be natural, even to the knower of truth, why then does the Brihadaranyaka text deny the possibility of desire in his case in the words desiring what, etc.? The text unambiguously declares the non existence of desire in him who knows the truth. How can this assertion be reconciled with the fact that he comes to possess desires due to the residual effects of his prarabdha? To this objection, the reply is the Brihadaranyaka text does not deny the existence of desires in the case of one who knows the truth. It declares only the sublation of desires. Desires there are even for the enlightened, but they are unproductive of further effects. Like fried grains, they are impotent to produce fresh shoots. The desire of the knower is unproductive because he knows the unreality of the object of his desire. Just as fried grains are useful for eating and not for sprouting, the desire of the knower of truth give him a little enjoyment, but they do not entail in their train any more of their kind. The deeds which have begun to bear their fruit perish when they have borne their fruit. Since prarabdha is the cause only of enjoyment, it dies with the destruction of its product. There can be misery only when there is the delusion that the object of enjoyment is real. The person who possesses true knowledge is devoid of such a delusion and hence he is not worried by his prarabdha. The delusion that the object of enjoyment is real is of the form. Let not this enjoyment perish. Let it increase more and more. Let there be no obstruction to it. On account of it, I am indeed fortunate. This delusion is overcome by the knowledge which enables a person to transcend both likes and dislikes. Though enjoyment is common to the enlightened and the ignorant alike, the latter comes to grief while the former do not. The deluded people are very much grieved because they wish for impossible things. They desire the permanence of things which are impermanent. They wish to squeeze happiness out of the objects of enjoyment which are by nature the source of misery. The wise men, on the contrary, know the illusoriness of sense enjoyment. Withdrawing their desires from sense objects, they enjoy only such of those which are the result of their prarabdha and do not come to grief. Observing the world to be of an impermanent and indeterminable nature, comparable to the dream and the fata morgana, how can the knower of truth be attached to it? Who except those who are perverse will drink poison after knowing its fatal consequences? The man who watchfully experiences both waking and dream should constantly ponder over the points of similarity between them. The world is no better than a dream. When the fictitious character of the world is well cognized, attachment to the objects of the world ceases along with the cessation of the cognition of reality in them. If the knower of truth knows that the world is but an illusory appearance, if he sees no reality in the objects of sense, how is enjoyment possible to him? The enjoyment of a thing is dependent on the knowledge of the thing to be real. The cognition of the unreality of thing and the enjoyment thereof are mutually incompatible. The reply to this objection is that the enjoyment of an object is not dependent on the object being real. There can be the experience of illusion even after the knowledge of its illusoriness. The fata morgana appears equally to those who know its unreality and those who take it to be real. The enjoyment born of prarabdha does not harm to him who does not forget that this world of duality is like the magician's world, indeterminable in nature. There is the restriction that true knowledge gives us the clear memory of the illusoriness of the world, but there is no rule that it is incompatible with the enjoyment of one's prarabdha. The obstinacy of prarabdha is in compelling the jiva to enjoy pleasure and suffer pain and not in postulating the reality of the objects of enjoyment. Knowledge and prarabdha are not contradictories since they have different contents like the color and taste of a substance. The magical feat is witnessed even by him who knows it to be fictitious. If prarabdha occasions the reality of the world and then produces enjoyment, it would be in conflict with the knowledge. But mere enjoyment does not induce any sense of reality in the object enjoyed. Prarabdha originates enjoyment even without invoking the cognition of the reality of the object. Undiminished enjoyment is caused by the fictitious objects of the dream world. Similarly, even the objects of waking experience are capable of effecting enjoyment without themselves being real. Knowledge is not the destroyer of prarabdha because it does not affect the dissolution of the world. It reveals only the illusory nature of the world, and by that the world is not dissolved. Just as the people of the world, while not denying the fact of magical feat, know it to be fictitious, the knower of the truth, while not discarding the enjoyment generated by prarabdha, possesses the cognition of the illusoriness of the world. True knowledge is the cause of the dissolution of the world. Scripture declares, where indeed the world is his self, there who shall see whom and by what? What shall be smell, or what shall he speak? It is evident from this statement that in the state of knowledge there is no empirical usage of the distinctions and divisions of the world. There are no seer and the seen, no doer and the deed. If this be the case, how can there be for the knower of the truth enjoyment generated by prarabdha? Knowledge destroys duality, and without duality there can be no action and the enjoyment of its fruit. To this objection, the reply is as follows. The Sutra, chapter 4, stanza 4:17 declares what scripture says about absence of all specific cognition refers either to deep sleep or union release, or this is manifested by the text. What the text say about the absence of specific cognition is said with reference to either the state of dreamless sleep or to the state of release. If this be not admitted, and if it be asserted that true knowledge is incompatible with the appearance of duality, then Yajnavalkya and others would not have been perceptors, for if there be perception of duality, there would be no knowledge for them, and if there be no non-perception of duality, there would be no speech. Thus, this absurd position would lead to the contingence of postulating ignorance for the great perceptors like Yajnavalkya. If it be said that Yajnavalkya and others who are entitled to preceptorship possess mediate knowledge and not the intuitive experience which is devoid of the perception of duality, then why should not sleep, which is also bereft of the cognition of duality, be the intuitive experience? If the non-cognition of duality be the differentia of intuitive experience, the state of dreamless sleep where there is no cognition of duality must be the intuitive experience of Brahma. If it be asserted that in sleep there is not the cognition of the truth of the self, then the cognition of the self and not the non-resemblance of duality is the differentia of spiritual intuition. The cognition of the self alone is knowledge and not the non-cognition of duality. The position of the opponent is in no way improved when he says that knowledge is a combination of the cognition of the self and the non-remembrance of duality. If both together constitute knowledge, then inert objects like pot, etc., would be entitled to half the knowledge, for they are entirely ignorant of the duality of the world. Even a sage immersed in samadhi would not be so non-cognizant of the distinctions of the world as the pot, etc. Does it then mean that the inert things occupy a higher stratum in the evolution of spiritual knowledge than the best among saints? If it be said that the cognition of the self alone constitutes knowledge, it is a contingence of the acceptable. The knowledge of the self requires the control of the mind. When the mind is brought under control, self knowledge is easily achieved. The Control of the mind is required because it is only by the controlled mind that the illusoriness of the world is cognized. The words of the Brihadaranyaka text desiring what etc. indicate that the knower of truth does not possess desires which are productive of further consequences. He has his mind under control and his desires are only those which come to him on account of his prarabdha. Certain texts of the sacred scripture declare that attachment is the mark of ignorance, and they say that the knower of truth is non-attached. How can the tree be verdant in whose hollow there is fire? Certain other texts admit desire in the case of the man who possesses true knowledge, because the meaning of the sacred teaching is concluded even by that there is release. Let attachment etc. be as they are desired. Their existence is not transgressed. The two sets of scriptural passages seem to involve a contradiction, but in reality, there is no conflict between them. Desires which have their root in ignorance and which are generative of further fruit are denied in the case of the enlightened person. But those desires which have lost their sting are not incompatible with the realization of the saint. So this video is completed. Next video number 11 will start with part 10 of chapter 7 of Panchadasi, and the topic will be self is non-attached. So thank you for watching this video. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe the channel. Namaskar my dear friends.